Hello and welcome to our presentation today on the Engaged Manager. My name is Charles Rogel and I'm the Director of Products and Marketing for DecisionWise, and I'll be the moderator for today's presentation. I'm joined today by the President and CEO of DecisionWise, Dr. Tracy Maylett.
Hi Charles, thanks for the opportunity.
And one of our consultants and master trainers here, Dr. David Mason.
Hi, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Tracy holds a doctorate in organization change from Pepperdine University and an MBA from Brigham Young University. He recently co-authored the book Magic 5 Keys to Unlock the Power of Employee Engagement, which is the basis for much of our today's presentation. Tracy also works with executive teams from around the world to interpret employee engagement survey results and drive organization performance. Tracy, anything else you'd like to add?
No, thank you again, Charles. I'm looking forward to this.
And David is a consultant and master trainer here at DecisionWise. He holds a doctorate degree in cognitive psychology from Columbia University, and he's been leading the development of our Engagement Magic training program. David, anything else I should add?
No, I'm president and CEO of my office. That's about it.
Thank you.
You do it well, Dave.
DecisionWise has been in business now since 1996, and we specialize in conducting employee engagement surveys and training leaders on employee engagement. This webcast is scheduled for 60 minutes. Everyone will be on mute, so if you have questions, please use the question tools to submit them, and then we'll try to address those questions as we go. This webcast has also been approved for 1 hour of HRCI credit. So after the presentation, I'll send an email that includes the HRCI program code to redeem your credit, along with links to additional information. And the biggest question that usually arises is, can I have access to the slides from today's presentation? I'll be actually providing you a variety of different white papers and other content items in lieu of the slides, but we're also recording today's presentation, so you'll have access to that. Tracy, let's begin by covering today's presentation, or the agenda for today's presentation.
Let's go through the agenda about what we'll be discussing today. First thing we want to address is the correlation between engaged managers and engaged employees, and we'll spend quite a bit of time on this. What really is that? And you'll see some statistics and some numbers that we'll throw out here. This has gained a lot of attention over the last little bit. Do engaged managers equate to engaged employees? The second piece that we'll be addressing here today will be really focused on what causes engagement in an organization. So as we do this, we're going to address what we refer to as the 5 keys that drive manager and employee engagement. So when we talk about 5 keys, this is the basis of the book Magic. We call it 5 Keys to Unlock the Power of Employee Engagement. The next thing we'll be addressing is what engaged managers do differently from their counterparts. So what makes them special? What sets them aside? And then lastly, we'll talk about 3 tools that every manager can use to understand and measure employee engagement. Now we're going to be talking about tools that don't require the spending of money.
That's really important.
It is. Yeah, one of the things that we want to address on this one is, does this mean we have to go out and do a weekly engagement survey with our employees? And the answer to that's no. There are different ways that we can do that. So let's dive into this and talk about why engagement's important and what's so critical about engagement. A gentleman by the name of Dr. James Tobin, by the way, was a Nobel Prize winner in economics. So this actually comes from the field of economics. And Tobin came up with an idea that was called Tobin's Q. Tobin's Q basically says, what really is the value of an organization or of a company? So you can sell your company, and the company is worth X. And X is more than what just we see the number of trucks that are outside or the inventory that we have in there. And his is what he refers to as Tobin's Q is this. It says equity market value plus liabilities market value divided by equity book value plus liabilities book value is Tobin's Q. This equates to the value of the company. Now basically this is a fancy way of saying the value of a business or an organization is more than just the materials that it possesses in that organization. You add a couple of other factors. One is what we refer to as market hype. So you take a look at an organization such as Facebook. Market hype drives the value of that business much higher. But the second component is really what we're going to be addressing today, and that's the idea of intellectual capital. That comes in 3 separate parts. One is organizational capital, the next one is customer capital, and then finally human capital. Organizational capital includes all those things that make our business valuable today, such as our trademarks, our patents, what are our systems, what are our processes, those unique things that make our business better than another business.
It's unique products.
Unique products, exactly right. And part of that's in market hype, but really this is, if I have a unique product, if I am Facebook, that's a unique product that's very difficult to replicate or duplicate. The next one is customer capital. That's what is my customer base. Do I have some big names that I'm working with, and what is the volume of that? Or do I just work with one or two very small companies?
So instead of competing with someone, you're kind of buying them out to get access to those customers.
That could be one of the reasons, is to gain access to that. Another one would be you take a look at that and say, I think because of the way I see this trending, we're going to be able to add to our customer base in the future.
Okay.
We also have human capital, which is the real basis of our discussion today. That human capital is organizations buy, when an organization is merged, acquired, purchased, etc., what we're looking at is what is the human capital of that organization. In other words, what's the brain power that exists? And this is partly where we look at things like trademarks and patents and all that, but really what it's referring to is the brain power that exists in that organization. What's in those individuals' heads that really drives performance of an organization? These factors all together equate to, as we mentioned before, Tobin's Q, but it adds to the value of the business. So the reason why we bring this up is because today, more than ever in the past, now that we're very much in a knowledge worker economy, the value of the business is directly related to the intellectual capital of that organization. It's not just based on the widgets we produce. Okay, so why is engagement important? Well, let's talk about some of the things that we're seeing right now. Now, we continue to see this on a regular basis, but the idea that we refer to it as the engagement sky is falling. Dr. Mason, you see this on a regular basis as you're out working with organizations.
Oh, constantly. Every single article tends to reference that engagement is at an all-time low. No one likes their job. Numbers coming out that are just catastrophic.
They tend to be variations on this central theme. 7 out of 8 employees is disengaged in their jobs. So you see all kinds of variations of this. There was another report that was released yesterday or this morning that I've seen, and it's been quoted a number of times since then, and that is the state of engagement with managers in organizations today is abysmally low. Now, we don't necessarily believe in that, and we'll talk to you a little bit about why that is, but let's put some common sense into this. As you're walking down the hall and you're passing 8 employees, do you really mean to say that in your organization only 1 out of every 8 employees is engaged in their jobs and those other 7 aren't making any contribution whatsoever? Or do we really believe that for every 3 managers that you have in there, 2 of those managers may be engaged in their job and 1 is very much disengaged in his or her job? It just doesn't make sense. Your business would have been out of business a long time ago if that were the case. So the headlines quoting and touting that the engagement sky is falling, we just don't believe in that. We'll tell you a little bit more about it today. It just doesn't make sense.
And it also doesn't follow from the data.
No, absolutely. And that's where we're going to focus today is what does the data really say? Now, these statistics are out there that are scared statistics that tell us that we're trying to drum up this idea that your employees are about ready to bolt for the door. The reality is the vast majority are not. That said, there are some things that we need to focus on to understand more about engagement and what are some of those things we can do, which is the purpose of this webinar.
We can definitely improve. We're just not falling off a cliff.
Here's some examples of why there is some truth to some of these, but not to the degree it says. We call this the engagement exercise, the engagement exodus, excuse me. So our benchmark, what we're taking from is data from 20.1 million responses from surveys. This is not a small database by any stretch. It's the largest of its kind that's been published in these studies. So this is from our DecisionWise 2014 database. Let me give you some statistics. So first of all, first one, employee engagement has dropped by 25% in top performers. Now this is critical. As we look at the last 3 years in this database, one of the things we notice is that overall engagement in most organizations is about the same as where it was a couple of years ago. But one of the things we're starting to see is that engagement within top performers, now this is operational performance, those who are doing their job well, etc., it's dropped by 25%. Dave, that's an alarming statistic.
It is, and it's important to note that there's a difference between engagement and performance that did not just automatically equate. That you can have someone who's a top performer that's not engaged, and people tend to take advantage of that, and that's part of the reason this is happening.
Exactly. Second one, only 57% of employees respond favorably to questions relating to growth and development opportunities within their companies or their organizations, and nearly half, 47%, feel that there are very few opportunities for advancement. We're going to talk in a minute when we refer to magic, this element here, and this is the growth element we'll discuss in just a moment. The last one, while 90% feel that they make a valuable contribution to the organization, A third of them do not feel that their work's valued, and 40% don't feel valued as employees. So do we have an engagement problem? Yeah, we absolutely do. There's no question about it. Does it need to be addressed? Absolutely. Is the sky falling? You know, your organization would have been out of business a long time ago if 7 out of 8 of your managers were disengaged in their jobs.
What we'd like to do here is we'd like to provide you permission to hope that this is not something that's so far out of reach. Oh my gosh, like we're 2 steps from bankruptcy because everyone's going to have a revolution. No, these are people that want to be engaged and they're ripe for it, and we're going to give you the tools on how to achieve that.
Very good. So what do we do about it? Well, first of all, let's turn to the experts and see what they say of why it's a problem. Let's refer to Dwight Schrute from The Office, the expert in engagement. One of my favorite quotes by Dwight is this one: "Would I ever leave this company? Look, I'm all about loyalty. In fact, I feel like part of what I'm being paid for here is my loyalty. But if there were somewhere else that valued my loyalty more highly, I'm going wherever they value loyalty the most." This is something that we do see. There's no question about it. So let's talk about where that loyalty comes from. Let's talk a little bit about where our base of the study comes from first.
Yeah, so many of you are probably familiar with our book, Magic 5 Keys to Unlock the Power of Employee Engagement. I just wanted to tout that recently the book won an award from Axiom Business Books for its content. So basically Axiom looked at over 400 book submissions. Magic won the Silver Award in one of the categories that they have, and we recently received notification of that last week.
We're excited to see that. So the point on this one is that what we're talking about over the next 45 minutes here is based on an extensive review of psychology literature. Dr. Mason here is going to talk a little bit more about where the psychological piece fits into this. This book was also, in the studies, based on over 14 million survey responses. Now, that's the largest of its kind in terms of this study. You just won't find a study out there like this. Now, that's increased over the last year to about 20 million. So what we're going to be talking today to you about is based on 20 million survey responses.
And we're looking at recent survey responses within the past 3 years.
Absolutely. Now, the question comes, is this just U.S.-based? The answer is no. This is based on 70 countries. Surveys were done in over 30 different languages here. And we're going to be talking about real business case studies. So this is not just us speculating on what the state of engagement is. These are real figures and real numbers.
So I think one of the problems, or I shouldn't say I think, we know one of the problems with engagement and why we were seeing that engagement problem that we referenced earlier is because we actually have a hard time defining what employee engagement is. Everyone wants to be engaged, and everyone wants their employees to be engaged. So if that's the case, why are we still finding difficulty in helping them be engaged? Well, part of that's because we're not sure what it is. So let's go on a little journey here so that we can all arrive at the same definition here. When we ask you, what is the contract between an employer and employee? What is that? What's in the contract? A lot of times we'll ask this question. I do a number of engagement trainings around the world. And we always ask the same question: what is in the contract? And people will start off with answers like, oh, well, there's got to be growth and there's got to be respect, and these are all things in the contract. And eventually, everyone will start arriving at the idea that, you know what, the contract isn't actually that extensive. It's, I will provide services, you will provide pay. And that's essentially it. There's a little bit more to it than that, but there's nothing in there about guaranteeing the chance for you to be creative or innovative or respect or anything like that. It's mostly just a basic legal thing. That's your bare minimum.
I'm not seeing the foosball table in here either.
That is not in the contract. I tried to get it written into my contract here. It didn't work. But we think it. So that's the key here with the contract. It's very much transactional. I give you this, you give me this. Quid pro quo. So we'll talk about hygiene factors here in a second. The contract, the transactional, it's all about the short term, just I'll give you this, you give me that. And really, this is how we treat the bulk of our employees from this transactional environment. This is where we focus a lot of our efforts. And for the most part, that's the organization. They're the ones that define the terms of the contract. You have a little bit of negotiation room, a little bit of wiggle room and stuff like that. But for the most part, the organization just says, this is what it is.
So as we refer to job satisfaction, and what we're talking about is this is the piece of the organization promises to give to me as I'm a worker here. And in return, I promise that I will work. I promise as a worker that I will also keep you out of jail. I will comply with basic compliance issues. I'll remain safe, maintain a safe environment. But beyond that, that's our contract.
Exactly. You have satisfied the terms of the contract.
Excellent.
Satisfaction. Now, is that the same as engagement? Are you super pumped when someone satisfies the term? When you go home at night and you've had a great day, is it because you did exactly what you were supposed to be paid for, or that they didn't, that you didn't have some sort of trouble with pay or safety or anything like that?
That doesn't cause excitement, does it?
No, you're satisfied. It doesn't make it a bad day, but that's not what gets you out of bed in the morning. That's not what gets you pumped up for the day or telling people what you do. I do exactly what I'm contracted to do.
So it's like a bank account.
Exactly like a bank account. Debits, withdrawals, everything is based on this transactional. And and as long as you've got these debits and withdrawals, what's going to happen is sometimes that's going to get a little out of balance. And that's where you start having trouble with satisfaction problems.
So you, as my employer, put certain things into this account that maybe, I pay you basically. Mm-hmm. So it could be financial, it could be other things.
And you expect a certain level.
I expect you to perform. Right.
Now, what happens if that starts getting out of whack? If, for example, you start expecting more from me, but not paying more from me? Well, you can see how the scales are starting to tip a little bit. And we say, oh, well, that's not great. Or let's flip it the other way. Let's say the company's paying you well, but you're not putting in the effort that they kind of contracted for you to do. You start getting out of balance, that's when you start getting out of satisfaction. You're not satisfying the terms anymore. And when you get into that, you start seeing a lot of problems.
So for centuries, we really based the organizational model off of the satisfaction model.
Yes.
In fact, we had organizations up until 5 years ago pretty regularly coming to us wanting to do a satisfaction survey. So how satisfied are my workers? And really, satisfaction is a contractual obligation that we have as employers, and your employees also have the same obligation to fulfill that contract.
Exactly.
But once the contract gets out of whack, then terms are off.
Exactly. And now the very first place you want to look at those contractual elements, those satisfaction elements, as we talk about, are called hygiene factors. Now, I don't know if you've heard of hygiene factors before. I'll give you a quick explanation of them. Hygiene factors are the things that you take for granted. When they're there, you don't notice them, but when they're taken away, then there's a huge problem. So, for example, anyone here listening, I use this example in my trainings all the time. How many of you are super excited today because you brushed your teeth this morning? And how many of you didn't even think about it? You're not even noticing it. You're not walking around with an extra hop in your step because your teeth are so nice and clean this morning. But I'll tell you what, if you forgot to brush your teeth this morning, you're running your tongue over it, you're covering your mouth when you talk to people, it changes your whole day. Now, what's a hygiene factor in terms of workplace? Well, as you can see in our slide here, one of the things is safety. If you work at a place that's, not following OSHA regulations or something like that, where it's a dangerous place to work, then that's a big deal, and that's going to be front of mind for you at all times. But if you work in a place that is safe, you don't even notice it. It's par for the course. You just expect it. Now, there's a number of hygiene factors.
Well, David, let me bring up the elephant in the room here. Pay, compensation.
Absolutely.
Is that a hygiene factor or is that an engagement factor?
That's 100% a hygiene factor. Because what'll happen is if you can always try and pay people more and they'll be super pumped up, but like we talked about with satisfaction, with transactional, it's always going to be short term. Eventually you'll just get used to that and that'll be par for the course. You expect that high pay and then you'll want higher pay. You'll want higher pay. And so it's never going to engage you. It's only going to satisfy you.
This is what we refer to as the adaptation principle in our magic book. The idea here is that what happens is, let's suppose I receive an increase of $1,500 of compensation in a year. To me, that feels pretty darn good. I'm happy about that, but that feels good for about a week and a half. And at that point, I adapt.
Then it gets spent.
Well, I spent it before that week and a half, but that's still okay.
I just paid off some bills.
That's right. But the idea here is I adapt to that. And now, if that were to be taken away, I'm not engaged because of that. But if that were to be taken away, all of a sudden I'm dissatisfied.
Let's go back to the balance metaphor, where you're tipping the scales. At first, it tips the scales in your favor, and you're really happy about it. Eventually, it balances back out. You're even. And now, if they take it away, and that doesn't necessarily have to be comp and benefits, but maybe some other things. If they take that away, suddenly it's out of whack the other way.
Exactly. There are a lot of hygiene factors that we need to consider. The problem is we mistake satisfaction elements for engagement elements.
Exactly.
In fact, as we look at surveys, a number of surveys that are out there, employee engagement surveys, they're really satisfaction surveys. They're measuring things, and it's important to measure things like compensation and safety. It's an important part of the survey, but that's not what engagement is.
Right. And we'll go to the next slide here, and we'll show you what another mistake that people make.
Love this.
So, for example, if we're thinking back to the balance metaphor, going out of whack, if you're an employer and you want to get more out of your employees, what do? You tip the scales in your favor. So you start giving them more. And maybe that's more money, but maybe it's something else. Maybe it's perks. This is a great example right here. I love the nap pod idea. Never met a person who wouldn't want a nap pod in their office. And so that's a great, Dr. Maylett mentioned foosball table earlier. There's always these perks that they send you. Great vacation benefits, great perks in the office, a health center, free food, anything like that. So what they do is they say, I'm going to give you more. Now I expect more from you. It's trying to balance that equation again. And again, that's a fantastic idea. It works. It's very nice to see that an office cares about you, an organization cares about you by giving these things. But let's go back to that same problem. Adaptation. You adapt to it. So suddenly, nap pods, par for the course. Now not only do you want nap pods, now you want someone to do your shopping for you and walk your dog.
Which is not actually unheard of in some corporations today. Now here's what's interesting about perks is we often get accused of being anti-perk. We're not anti-perk. We're all for them. But it's the value of perks is what perks represent versus the perk itself.
Exactly.
So for example, if we bring in a foosball table, and we do have a foosball table upstairs.
And I love it.
Love it. Have it in the break room. It's a lot of fun. The perk is not the foosball table. That's fantastic. It's great you have one, but it's what it represents. What it does is allow us as a company to say we have fun. We value an entertaining environment where you can relax and enjoy each other's company. That's the value of the perk and not the table itself.
Right. I didn't get out of bed this morning because I was excited to maybe play some foosball at lunchtime.
Well, I think the other reason why companies invest in perks is for attracting good talent. So if you're in a competitive environment, you're looking to get the best talent in your organization, people come and tour your facility and see these nice things, they're more likely to apply and maybe work for you. But what you really need to compete on is your culture. That's what really makes a big difference.
Which brings us to the next point, and that is, as we're working with people in organizations, we love to ask this question, what does a good day look like at work look like for you? Never do we get the answer, I got paid more, or I
was safe.
I was safe. Never heard that answer.
Not once.
It's not ever heard that I had a foosball table.
Right.
What kind of responses are you hearing?
You know what's really interesting about this is I expect a lot more responses like, well, my boss wasn't there looking over my shoulder or anything like that. And we never get that even. The responses are almost universal. A good day at work looks like for me when I accomplished something, when I helped someone, when I finished a big project that I've been working on. They're all very noble sort of things. And it's very gratifying to see that most people have this as their standard for a good day.
So, Dr. Mason, what is engagement then? We talked about what it is not. It's not satisfaction. What is engagement?
Engagement is that step beyond satisfaction. And there's two parts of it. There's an affective and a behavioral aspect to it. So the affective is that emotional state, when you feel those emotions, that passion, that energy, that commitment. And that manifests itself when you're investing your whole identity, your heart, your passion, right? Your spirits, your attitude, your mind, your creativity, and your hands, your actual working, hands-on, getting stuff done. When you get all that, when you're investing your full self into something, that's engagement. So yeah, right here. Do you see how the difference between satisfaction and engagement? Satisfaction is transactional. Engagement
So it's
is
this for that. It's quid pro quo.
Yes.
You do this, I do that. It's a transaction.
and you satisfy an equation.
Okay.
This is transformational. You throw out the idea of quid pro quo. You throw out because you're just giving your best self. And whatever that is, you just do it. And you're not doing it in expectation. You're doing it because it helps you feel better and because you're making a difference, because you are changing who you are, that long-term nature as you see here. And it's your choice. You're not being forced to. The organization didn't stipulate this in your contract. This is you investing your best self. Sometimes we call it the autotelic personality, things like that, that discretionary effort. And this, 50-50, this is owned by both of you. Organization helps create the environment. You provide the grist for the mill.
And that's what the rest of the conversation today is going to be on, is how do I as a manager create that environment in which employees can choose to be engaged? It's a 50-50 proposition. And when we talk about this, David just mentioned the heart, the hands, the spirit, the mind. The idea here is when we look at the heart and the spirit, it involves a feeling. It's a way I feel. It's an emotion that I have inside. Whereas the mind and the hands actually implicate that we do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
So engagement's not just, it's different than happiness. It's not just feeling good.
Right.
It implies that we have to engage, meaning we actually have to physically or mentally do something about it. Now, why are we prefacing this with all of this stuff on engagement? Well, there's a reason. It's because we confuse it. As managers, one of the first things that happens is, and I work with a number of different managers that come to me and say, we're losing our employees, and they're out of here at a record rate. We need to pay them more. That's always the first answer. They're going down the street because they got paid more. And when the HR department looks into it, we find out, well, they really didn't get paid much more, certainly not enough to make the transition. So what's happening? What we deal with pretty regularly is that when we look at engagement, we have an investment, and that investment is made. And that investment in satisfaction includes things like we pay people more, we bring in the ping pong table or whatever that may be. We have these perks. The return on that investment is somewhat low, so we get a small return. Most of the time, perks and satisfaction investments don't really pay off. In other words, we don't generate a return directly from those. Engagement is different. Engagement doesn't cost money. So perks, David, do you agree with that? Perks cost money. Engagement doesn't always cost money.
Right. There's a sacrificial element that with engagement is just sort of changing what you're already doing. There's no sacrifice. Whereas satisfaction is very much you need to change what you're doing.
Okay.
And you have to invest time, resources, and things like that. And it's this illusory return that you get.
Exactly. So managers quite often those who mistake satisfaction for engagement say, in order to satisfy my employees or engage them, I need to be investing money. I need to bring in extra pay. I need to increase everyone's wages by 10%. I see this very regularly. Engagement's different. It doesn't require that level of financial investment, but what's really interesting is the return is so much greater than it is with satisfaction. Let's keep this in mind through the webinar. Satisfaction doesn't generate a commensurate return for the amount of investment. Engagement generates an exponential return.
Now, that's not to say that satisfaction is not important. In fact, it's foundational. It's incredibly important. If you're not satisfying those basic elements, as you can see in this equation here, the job conditions, do you have the resources necessary to complete your job? Are you safe at your job? Things like that. But also the psychological needs, that idea of do you feel safe at your job? Do you feel like people are investing in you? Things like that.
Well, there's even a sense here of do I feel valued? Am I treated with dignity and respect that I deserve? That's not necessarily engagement. That's a satisfaction element. I need to have that. It's a basic element.
Are people honest where I work? Mm-hmm. Do they work with integrity? These are psychological needs. These are foundational. They're key to that. And then you add that engagement on top of it. Now look where your performance goes. You'll still have performance. And in fact, like we said before, sometimes you'll even have top performance that aren't engaged. But if you get that engagement part of the equation in there, that's going to be where you see the greatest results.
So let's get to the heart of the webinar. What is a manager's role in engagement? We talked about with satisfaction that one of the roles of a manager is to provide that level of satisfaction, make sure that safety's there. In fact, the organization owns 90% of that equation. Whereas engagement, it's a 50-50 proposition. So what is that 50% by the managers? Well, I want to start out by playing fact or fiction here. From the day I first had my first management responsibility, I remember it was about 20 years ago, and my boss sat me down and said, you're in charge of these 8 people. And when my boss talked to me about it, one of the things that he said very clearly was people join companies. So remember, the reason why people are here is because of a cause or why we're doing what we're doing. They join companies, but they quit managers. And so that's always stayed in my head. Do people quit managers? So this is one of those fact or fictions. Let's look at where we're coming from here. First of all, we'll answer that question. Yeah, that's a fact, but with a very, very clear but in there. And let's explain what we're talking about here. And this is important to understand this difference. So this is based on a 2014 study. Charles, you mind just talking a little bit about some of the numbers of the study? This was not insignificant. This was a large study.
This in fact is the largest study of its kind. We've seen similar anecdotal type studies out there that have come to similar conclusions, but we wanted to prove it soundly. So we looked at 22 companies, about 19,000 employees, all the managers in those companies, 2,300 of them, and it worked out to be about 215 work groups when we broke it all down.
Large group, large population, so it's fairly representative of an overall group. Let's see what we said. So first of all, we wanted to test 2 hypotheses. The first one is, What we felt was just kind of common sense. Engaged managers have engaged employees. That makes sense, right? I mean,
I wouldn't bet against that.
no. Disengaged managers on the opposite side of that have disengaged employees. Same thing, makes common sense. This is what we've also been hearing in business school forever and ever. We've been hearing this in terms of even social settings, that if we're engaged in what we're doing, the people around us will be engaged as well. So what did we find? Well, let's take a look at this. This is based on employee engagement, the study that we did. Let me explain what we're looking at. In the blue there, and the red, and then you see a green and also purple there, what we're looking at is the level of engagement of a manager. So we basically took a number of engagement questions and assigned that manager a category.
Actually, at the bottom, the fully engaged manager is this one, this group that we're looking at, and those would be the employees that they manage.
Yes.
Okay, that's what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. So we're looking at the manager, and we're saying this manager is based in, we're looking at the categories these people fit into. So what we're doing, as Charles was pointing out here, is we're taking a look at the manager and say, we have managers who are fully engaged, right?
Mm-hmm.
So does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so we're looking at this in the blue, the level of management, the fully engaged managers, and then we're looking at the level of engagement of their team. Okay? So we're saying of our fully engaged managers, so these were those who responded positively to being fully engaged in the organization, when we looked at them, the fully engaged managers had teams that were also somewhat engaged. So their employees, over there in blue, so remember that we're looking at fully engaged managers, now we're looking at their employees, their teams, 38% of their teams were also fully engaged. Okay. Did I get that right, Charles?
That's right.
Okay, good. Key contributors, 42% of them were key contributors. So these are our strong and steady. 18% were what we refer to as the opportunity group, and then our fully disengaged group, we had 2% that were disengaged in what they were doing. Now, that was the fully engaged manager. So if I'm a fully engaged manager, I can expect that 38% of my employees will be fully engaged, 42% will be key contributors. You add those two numbers up and you have about 80% of your folks that are engaged if you're a fully engaged manager. Now let's look at the manager who is a key contributor. Now this is less engaged, or not fully engaged, but they're still the strong and steady. Now notice what happens to the key contributors, or the red, if I'm a key contributor manager. So David, you are my manager and you are fully engaged.
Yes.
I'm very likely also to be fully engaged or a key contributor as well.
Absolutely.
Charles, you're my manager and you're a key contributor, not as engaged as Dr. Mason, but you're engaged in what you do. Now 61% of us are now key contributors. Notice what happened to the fully engaged group.
Yeah, that's a big difference between
Huge drop.
38% to 16%.
Huge drop. Now notice what's also happening to our disengaged people. That's more than double.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a manager and I'm in the opportunity group. Now what this means is that I'm a manager who's not really engaged. I could go either way. Now notice what happens to the opportunity group here. So now the fully engaged people on my team, they're not nearly as many. The opportunity group, well, they're more than if I were fully engaged, but they're less than if I were a key contributor. But notice what happens to the opportunity group. So we're seeing a reflection take place here. What's also interesting here is that the fully engaged people now remain about the same, disengaged, excuse me. They remain about the same. Now let's look at if I'm a disengaged manager, I'm fully disengaged. Notice what happens. I only have 14% of my workforce that's fully engaged in what they do. I have 22% of my people that are fully disengaged. This was an interesting study because it told us a few different things. Dr. Mason, would you mind talking a little bit about some of these findings and what we came up with?
So if you just look at that chart, you would say, oh, that's obvious. Engaged managers have engaged employees. Disengaged managers have disengaged employees.
So do we support that hypothesis?
As of right now, we're supporting that hypothesis. But let's dive in a little bit further. And this is the beauty of statistical analysis, is that just being engaged doesn't actually cause the other people's engagement. We ran this causal analysis on it, and we found that just by being engaged or disengaged didn't directly affect it.
So let's stop for just a second, because this is key.
That's weird, right?
I am a manager, and I'm really engaged in what I do.
Yes.
Does that mean that the 10 of you that are in this room will be engaged as well?
And that's what the numbers seem to say. They seem to say that's all you have to do. If you're engaged, then that's going to be it. But we're missing that middle variable, that mediating variable that connects your engagement to my engagement.
Okay, so I as a manager, there's a correlation or relationship between my level of engagement and your level of engagement.
Exactly.
What we're finding, though, is that simply being engaged is not the cause of that taking place.
Mm-hmm. In fact, if you look at our analysis, there's almost no causal relationship of just that engagement. It's all hinging on this point right here. They're more likely to create the environment. And it's that environment creation that causes your employees to become more engaged.
So I can't catch the engagement virus from my manager, but I could by working in his same environment, his or her environment.
Well, right. And the engaged manager is going to create that environment for you.
Right.
And so it's not just we need to hire for people that are similar to that engaged manager, but they will go out of their way to change the environment for you personally.
And just the fact that Dr. Mason is engaged in his job does not mean that I'm going to be engaged in my job. In fact, there's a correlation, but that's because what Dr. Mason does because he's engaged creates my engagement. So it's kind of a fine line that we want to detail in more depth. Now, does that mean that a manager can't impact engagement? What we very clearly understand is, no, a manager has a great deal of impact on engagement, but just being engaged or just having that feeling does not create engagement.
And it's because engagement is that choice. I, as a manager, can't just suddenly grab Dr. Maylett by the lapels and just shake him, be more engaged. That's not how it works. We have to allow them to choose it, and I can facilitate that in several ways.
Let's give an example of this. Of our database, we have a question, I can speak up without fear of retribution. A third of the employees felt like they can't speak up for fear of retribution. This was across, again, 20 million responses. Mm-hmm. So, wow, that creates an issue. In fact, let me show you this. This is a correlation we've done, a strong connection between the perceptions of the leader. So over on the left-hand side, it says my supervisor, whether or not I rate that individual favorably. So in our surveys, we asked them to rate their supervisor and their relationship and the way they see them. We also correlated that with a question, and that is on this particular survey, question 29, fear of speaking up. One of the things we find is a very clear relationship between the way I perceive my supervisor and whether or not I feel I can speak up. So my relationship with my supervisor is impacted by the things my manager does, very, very clearly. Let's add to your manager toolkit here. So we're going to talk about 3 different tools that can really help you. One is an understanding of some psychological principles and organization development principles called contagion, advocacy, and empowerment. So we're going to explain that correlation that we just discussed. We're going to talk about magic, or keys to unlock the power of employee engagement. And then finally, we're going to give you a couple of things that you can do to help assess engagement.
So you can see here the contagion, advocacy, and empowerment. Let's talk about contagion real quick, because what we just said was, just by me being engaged, I can't make you be engaged. And that's true to a certain extent. However, let's not pretend that someone's mood can't influence someone else's mood. That's just, everyone's got an experience with that. And so to claim otherwise would be ridiculous. So let's look at that. We unintentionally mimic the public displays of mood in others, right? If I'm in a room full of a bunch of happy people and I'm kind of feeling sour, I might not suddenly change from sour to ecstatic, but I'm at least going to elevate in my mood. You can't help it. And it works the other way around as well. Now, there's also something that's really interesting about how the body works, is that just by mimicking certain behaviors, you can actually create that emotional state. One of the great experiments is hold a pen in your teeth or hold a pen in your lips. And if you hold it in your teeth, you're kind of forced to smile, and people rate themselves as happier. If you hold it in your lips, you're forced to frown a little bit, and they rate themselves as less. It's just little things like that.
It's interesting. So it comes in 2 stages. One is we mimic, then that mimicking causes that behavior to take place.
Exactly. And so there is an element to an engaged manager just being more upbeat that is going to actually help that. But let's not pretend that it's going to force them to. It just is part of that creating that environment.
Well, and this is what Charles is referring to also. This works the other way around to what we refer to as reverse contagion. Reverse contagion is when that group is engaged and the manager tends to be more engaged as well.
Oh, absolutely. There was a Final Four game, or the championship game on last night, right? You should have seen the winning coach. Man, was he ecstatic. Did he play anything? Not really. It was his kids that did it, but he was super a part of it.
So the contagion effect is one thing we need to be aware of as managers is, yeah, it is contagious. Just the fact that I am engaged, it's not necessarily causing you to be engaged, but do understand that it can have some impact.
It creates that environment. It's part of that. Yes, absolutely. Now let's look at it in terms of advocacy, because this is where managers are so important, because they're that chain link between a lot of different hierarchies in the organization.
They're in the middle of it, aren't they? They're advocating both for the organization and on behalf of the employees.
Exactly, and as such, they're going to be key links going both up and down in communicating whatever those moods, like we just talked about, or those particular just communication in general between the two. And so by being that voice, what kind of voice are you going to be?
So let's talk about how managers inhibit engagement and what happens.
So negative mood and affect.
And that's what we just discussed.
Now, have you heard about the Pygmalion effect? It's this idea that how you think about someone and they will live up to that. So if I think positively of Charles over here, Charles is going to do better. He'll just feel like, oh yeah, that's great. And if I think negatively of you, Dr. Maylett, then what's going to happen is you're going to live down to that expectation.
So David, here's the deal. Charles has a negative attitude.
Yes.
We both know that.
He does. We need to talk to him. This is just an intervention. Is what this is.
So what happens is I look for evidence to support that whenever I see it in Charles, and I ignore evidence to the contrary. So I've formed an opinion, Pygmalion, or actually the Gollum effect, which is the negative side. In this particular case, is I look for evidence to support that, and that further decreases that opinion.
And it might be evidence that really is, like if he does something negative, I'll say, oh yeah, that's evidence. But sometimes he'll do something ambiguous, and I'll just say, oh, well, that's evidence of negative, when it's not really.
Good. So over or under manage, this is when the manager either is a dictator or on the other end of that uses a very hands-off or laissez-faire approach.
Yeah. And a problem with that loosey-goosey effect is sometimes people need more structure when they're not necessarily experts or they need that. And if you put someone in an overwhelming situation by just not giving them enough structure, they're not going to be as engaged. If you overmanage them and take an expert and say, no, you have to do it my way, again, they're just not going to be as engaged.
I, as a manager, if I create that fear of speaking up, have pretty much stifled engagement in my organization.
What's the point? I thought just a cog at that point. You know, I just have to listen and kowtow to whatever you say.
The next one is fail to connect individual contributions to larger goals of the organization.
And this is a nice one because we'll be talking a little bit more about this, but this is, are you making a difference? Does your life matter in terms of this organization, or does it not? This is an impact factor right here. It's very important.
You know, I notice this as I work with teenagers a lot also, and working with the teens, one of the things that's important they understand is that I am somebody, I add value. There's a reason for me being here. That happens in organizations as well. There is a reason why you, employee, are part of this organization. You add value. So how do we increase engagement? How do managers do this?
Well, we have a perfect system for this, actually. So the very first one we like to do, meaning. If you can help people find that value, give them meaning in their work, they're golden. If you can delegate, coach, support them in the ways that work best for them, create that autonomous experience so that they are agentic and can work for something that is theirs that they produce, you're going to find more engagement. If you can foster their personal mastery experiences, that's going to create some growth. If you can provide the feedback, information, and resources like we just talked about and connecting your contribution to what's happening, impact. And then lastly, establishing that collaborative environment, that personal working alliance. You're creating that connection between people, the organization, their mission, their goals. These are all things that will raise engagement, and these are all things within the control of a manager.
Now, David, this is a setup for what we refer to as magic.
Yes.
Meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection are really what a manager can help create in order for an employee to be engaged in what they do. It goes beyond satisfaction, and it really is transformational. Meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. It's an easy acronym to remember. So let's just briefly talk about each one of these.
Okay. Your work has purpose beyond the job itself. Meaning. This is one of the greatest things you can do, because you'll find people, and this is, if you look at a lot of nonprofits or a lot of charities, and they have terrible working environments. They're getting paid pennies on the dollar. They're working in really unsafe places and things like that, and yet they love what they do and they sign up for it. This is the business model of the Peace Corps, essentially, right? Like, and they will do it because they have that meaning. Now, not everyone can join a job that has all this meaning. Maybe you're not a firefighter. Maybe you're not a teacher. Maybe you don't have a lot of that inherent meaning in your job itself. Maybe you're filling out 20 TPS reports a day or whatnot. This is hard. And so your job as a manager is to connect what they're doing to something meaningful, their particular values. And that might be something valuable within the organization, or it might be, hey, you're helping put your kids through college and put them in a nice neighborhood. That's an associated meaning that isn't necessarily in the task itself. That's not necessarily in that spreadsheet, but one that you can still derive meaning from.
Great. Let's talk about the next one, which is autonomy. Now, managers have a great deal of impact on autonomy.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, they're critical to this aspect of it. The job is to be able to find where someone can find the power to be their best self. And that's giving them lots of freedom, less freedom, and more structure. It's the idea that allows someone to perform at their best. And you can do it in several different ways. The thing is, most people just think of one way. Oh, well, I want to do the task this way or that way. Well, that's great. That's task autonomy. But you can also give people autonomy in very different ways, such as social autonomy, who they work with, and how they work with them. Spatial autonomy, this idea that you can work kind of where you want, or you can adjust the environment in which you work. And temporal autonomy, when you work, when the particular deadlines and things like that. You can play around with things like that. So let's say I give you an assignment and say, this is the deadline on Friday. But instead, I want to give you more autonomy. So I say, you're smart, and I trust you. When do you think you can get that done? Oftentimes, because that Pygmalion effect, I'm thinking the best of you. You say, tell you what, I'll get it done by Thursday. Because you respect and treat me and trust me with that respect, I will get it done. One thing I'd like to point out real quick. How much money did these things cost so far?
Yeah, these are not money investments.
Not at all.
But it takes a conscious decision to make that happen.
Exactly.
So meaning, autonomy, our M and our A. Let's talk about the G, growth.
All right. You want to be autonomous because it allows you to grow. Growth is the tangible result of having more autonomy. It's being stretched, being challenged in ways that help you grow. And that can be personally, that can be professionally. Doesn't necessarily mean promotions. Doesn't mean you add just some extra letters on the end of your name or an extra gold plaque on your desk. What it means is you're becoming better in several ways. If you look at a balloon, if you don't fill up that balloon and it's just kind of limp and flaccid, that's a boring balloon. It becomes interesting when you fill it, when you stretch it, when it grows. That's when it starts fulfilling its purpose as a balloon.
We have to be careful. There's also a thing called overstretching this balloon.
Yeah.
A very, very mad mother at a birthday party when that happens, right?
And that's true. If you try and stretch someone too much, what's going to happen? They're going to explode. They're going to burn out. They're not going to be able to. And this is part of you as a manager, is recognizing how far can I stretch someone before they break? Where are they still going to be comfortable and growing?
So one thing we refer you to in the Magic Book is the idea of the zone of proximal development, which basically says I can develop better at a certain level when I'm stretched, but not stretched too far when it becomes stressful.
Right, and that's as a manager's responsibility, because they're not just going to stretch themselves, because that's not stretching enough. You have to be there to support and help them get to that place.
Meaning, autonomy, growth, now impact.
Impact is the result of having meaning. If you find something meaningful, I have certain values, impact is the tangible result of that. What is the actual effect I am creating in my job, in the world? It's seeing those positive and worthwhile outcomes and results from your direct intervention, from your work.
Now, as a manager, the more I can connect the employees with the end result, so there's a reason why I'm producing this, I'm soldering this little wire, on this little thing. It's because what we're doing is we're creating a life-saving pacemaker for these individuals. You're saving lives by doing this little, soldering this little piece on here.
Mm-hmm.
So connect them to the end result. When we look at impact versus effort, what's interesting here is that we have the quadrants here, the four areas. When we compare those, there are some things that take place. Sorry, I'm playing around with the slides here. Now, when we have low effort and low impact, that results in those areas that are really just don't make much of a difference for us.
No, it's just boredom at that point.
It really is boredom. Then we have those areas that are high impact but low effort.
Right, so impact by itself is not necessarily great. It helps. It's definitely better than low impact. But high impact, low effort, well, that's doing something amazing but not really being a part of it.
That's right. We call this autopilot.
Yes.
Zone. Then we have those areas where it's high effort but low impact.
Well, that's literally the worst kind of job you can have.
It is. We call this basically is burnout.
Right.
I'm spinning my wheels but not getting anything accomplished.
The epitome of the rat race.
Right. We then have high effort, high impact. So I have to put forth some effort here but I have great impact.
And that's why when we ask people what was a good day at work, it's when they say, I helped someone, I accomplished something I've been working on for a while, and I did it.
That's where engagement takes place. So
Yes.
as a manager, understand where those fit. Connection is the last one.
The sense of belonging to something greater than yourself. And that doesn't just, a lot of times when we talk about connection, we immediately start talking about just, do I get along with people? Do I have a best friend at work or something like that? And that's all good, but it's not the whole picture. When we want to talk about connection, connecting to something greater than yourself, people is definitely part of that social aspect. But you can also connect to the organization, the brand. Hey, when you say where you work, do you say, oh, I do this, or do you say, I work for? Right? That's when you're connected to the organization.
So I am a Disney cast member.
Exactly. The mission of the organization. Are you committed to whatever it is? So, for example, are you committed to sustainability, which happens to be your organization? Are you committed to something else? What about values? The actual values that they have, such as that honesty, integrity, or I'm going to always make sure to leave the world a better place. Very tied in with mission, but also another area you can connect. And lastly, the task. Do you like the actual work that you do, the day-to-day? You can definitely be connected to that.
Very good. So when we're talking about magic and talking about connection in particular at 3 levels, one is, do I fit in the organization, or do I feel like a misfit?
Yeah, this is base level right there.
The next one is, do I belong? Do I feel like, yeah, this is home for me? Not only do I fit, but I belong here. I should be here. The last one is the highest level, which is integrate. That is, I become part of the organization, but the organization also becomes part of me.
It's your identity at that point. Not just that you belong, but that it is you.
These are the people at the basketball game last night who had painted their chest with the letter or color of their team.
They're crying when they lose or euphoric when they win.
Exactly right. So magic, meaning autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. A manager has a very critical role in making sure that that exists. But remember, it's the employee's choice. We talk about what we refer to, so the last tool that we want to provide you is what we refer to as, well, a broader picture is, how do we assess engagement? We use what we call engagement conversations or engagement interviews, and it's important that managers understand this. Within the Magic Book, there are a number of different questions that we provide, but here are a couple. David, I know that you've used some of these in organizations.
Absolutely. They're so effective, and they seem so simple that it'd be easy to dismiss. But I'll tell you what, this is often the highlight of the training when I tell people how to conduct one of these in a really effective way. Normally when you see someone who's not doing very well, not very engaged, you go up to them, hey, what can we do to help you? What can we do to change? And then they'll give you an answer. And nothing comes of it. So what we do is we say, hey, frame it in a little bit different way. Instead of saying what's wrong or anything like that, say, what do you like? What keeps you here? What do you see that would ever cause you to leave, right? How can we improve the organization in a way that you see us going? What direction? One of the ones that I love to use that I think is really effective is, if you were to retire next week, what would be the first thing that you started missing about this place? What would be the second? That's a perfect prioritization of where you connect to this, where you find your engagement in this organization.
David, this seems like common sense to ask these questions, but we find that really less than 10% of managers ask these type of questions. What they do ask is, so what don't you like, or what do we need to fix? Mm-hmm. And sometimes they immediately go after it and try to fix it, and sometimes they don't do anything at all.
And that's assuming they got the answer right in the first place.
Exactly right.
If I'm not engaged and you start telling me what's wrong, I'm not going to give you an honest answer.
Right. So I said, you sit down with me as you're my boss, and you say, what keeps you here? Why are you working here? That's a different type of question to ask, that what am I doing wrong that I need to fix?
Exactly.
Managers typically don't know how to conduct those interviews.
No, there's a very definite skill set for that.
So one of the things we do is, how do I prepare for that interview? One of the things that we'll offer up right now. Charles, do you mind just mentioning what this is so that they can have access to this?
I'll be sending you an email after the presentation today with a link to our Engagement Magic Self-Assessment. Essentially, it's exactly what it says it is. It's a 35-question survey that you take. It provides you a score immediately after you click Submit on your results, and you basically understand where you fall compared to everyone else that's taken the assessment, but you also get a breakout by each of the different magic components that we just talked about.
So there's no charge to take this.
Free.
And the reason why we put this in here is because quite often before you have that engagement conversation, it's not required, obviously. You can have an engagement conversation without it, but it's often very good for an employee to sit down and look at his or her own level of engagement. And this is a way to start a conversation that may not normally exist. So I work for David, And David, I know that we're going to have a performance review and a development discussion coming up here. And as part of that, David wants to understand more about my engagement. He can ask me to go take this or give this to me so that I can at least reflect on it. I don't have to show my results to David, and he won't see those results. But it gets me thinking about this before that conversation takes place.
Helps you articulate things that you wouldn't normally have understood about yourself.
There's a tool that we'll throw out there free of charge. Feel free to use it. We've had numerous people take this, and they find it's very useful as they conduct these engagement interviews. So, Dr. Mason, what else do we include in engagement conversations? Well, I want to understand Charles a little bit better, and I want to understand what keeps Charles here. What is his level of engagement overall? How do I have some questions? What do I ask?
Well, the questions you want to ask are questions that are about Charles. Say, hey, what's going on? Not just about the behavior, but about their values, about Charles's values, about what's important to him. And so the one way to get that is not just say, hey, Charles, what are your values? Tell me your values. I want 7 of them, right? You say, hey, what's a good day at work look like for you? And then as soon as they say that, suddenly you have an inkling of, oh, well, he says when I got something done. So something that he values is helping people, accomplishing stuff like that. And it just naturally leads into this. And so a lot of this is understanding your employees and caring about them at a much more personal level than we're trained to, than is intuitive, but is also very natural once you have that permission to go that way.
So let's try this out. So Charles, we're going to put you on the spot here. Actually, this was not rehearsed.
Yeah.
So we're going to have, again, this is an intervention for Charles, so we're going to ask the question. Charles, what about your job gets you out of bed in the morning? What do you do this?
For me, I've got a set of goals, marketing goals that I work towards every month and every quarter. And for me, it's really trying to figure out the formula that makes those goals achievable. So what are we going to do differently today that we haven't done yet that's going to increase our performance? And for me, it's nice to always know that there's a myriad of things we could do. We just need to kind of figure out the formula and then start implementing and testing and seeing which ones are working, which ones aren't.
Good. So instead of making some assumptions, I'm going to do it with David here in just a second with the C, the connection piece. But instead of making some assumptions about what engages Charles, and I therefore say, Charles is engaged by foosball tables. Let's get him in the foosball table. I'm asking you the question. I'm learning some things about you, and we're having a conversation.
And what did you hear there? I heard he likes innovation. He likes to come up with the idea of being able, the challenge of accomplishing these goals, tangible results that he can measure.
But David, let's put you on the spot.
All right.
Do you feel like you belong here? Why or why not?
Honestly, yes and no. Like I come from an academic background, and so sometimes I don't feel like I belong in terms of I'm still really learning my way around the business. But I'll tell you what, the people here really make me feel welcome, and they value my unique contribution. And so in that sense, I do feel like I belong as part of the organization and part of the mission of this place as a whole. And in fact, this is one of the things that engages me the most, is how much I enjoy that connection to everyone around here and that opportunity to provide something, to be unique and to provide a valuable contribution.
So this is not a surprise. Dr. Mason and I have this conversation on a regular basis. One of the values that he brings is that uniqueness. At the same time, we as an organization need to make sure that we're taking advantage of that and that he has that ability to translate that academic into the professional environment. So the reason we bring this up is because, again, only less than 10% of managers are actually having these conversations.
And even if they did, they're not even sure what engagement means at this point.
They don't do it the right way. There's no question. So bottom line, what's a manager's role? First of all, understand what engages the team and create that culture. Second, hire and develop employees who can engage in that unique culture. And then finally, don't mess it up. Managers can cause disengagement in an organization or create that environment in which people don't choose to be engaged in what they do.
So that concludes our presentation today. We'd like to thank everyone for participating. Just a reminder, I'll be sending out an email with a link to a lot of the resources we talked about today, as well as where you can purchase the book. The book is, what we shared today is just kind of scratching the surface on what's available from the book. A lot of the principles that we talked about came from the book today. So we'd like
including some of those engagement interview questions, a section on that.
Yeah, there's a lot more information about that. There's a whole section, chapter dedicated to what a manager can do to improve engagement in the organization. So look forward to those links. Also, the presentation is also based on the training that we've developed from all the research in the book, the Engagement Magic training, and it basically has two parts. One is the first day is to understand engagement, and so This training is meant for both employees and managers that can attend this together. And then the second day, the half day, is really how managers can impact engagement. A lot of what we talked about today, but we go more in depth and have a lot more experiential learning exercises. And then finally, we'd just like to thank everyone for participating. Thanks, Tracy and David. And
thanks, Charles.
Look forward to my email, and hopefully we'll have you join us on some future webinars.
Thanks for your time.